My name is Madison. I am 28 years old, and this is the story of how one sentence turned my life's work into someone else's consolation prize. It sounded harmless at first, almost soft, the kind of excuse families wrap in love so it will hurt more politely. By the time my mother finished saying it, $4 million of blood, sweat, and sleepless nights had quietly changed hands. I did not explode. I did not flip tables or threaten lawsuits. I smiled, signed where she told me to, and walked away, like I was simply leaving a meeting that had run too long. On the surface, that was the end of it. The strong daughter stepping aside because she'll be fine, and the fragile one being wrapped in a company she had never built. What my mother did not know was that I had already started seeing numbers that did not add up. Lines of credit that appeared out of nowhere, vague expansion costs that smelled more like desperation than strategy. The day I stepped out of that office, my name was still tangled inside documents I had never seen, and somewhere under the polished branding, something ugly was starting to rot. 30 days later, my phone lit up with my mother's name, same ringtone, different weight. I watched it buzz across my desk in my new half-empty studio, surrounded by paint samples and bare brick instead of glass walls and reception desks. I already knew in broad strokes what she was running from. I just did not know how far she expected me to chase it for her. I answered anyway. Her voice came through in broken pieces soaked in panic. "Please save your sister. She's not okay. The calls, the letters, the bank. You have to fix this. You know how all of this works." There it was again, that old reflex buried in her tone. You are the strong one. You are the one who cleans up. You are the invisible net under every fall. What she did not realize was that this time the net had a knife in its hands. Stay with me until the end, and you will see how that one sentence not only cost my family a $4 million empire, but also turned my silence into the sharpest revenge I could ever give. I did not wake up one morning with a multi-million-dollar company and a stack of contracts. The first version of my dream fit on a coffee-stained napkin I kept folded in my wallet for years. I sketched it during a graveyard shift at a furniture store, balancing on a stool between returns and bored customers, drawing tiny living rooms and kitchens the way other people doodled flowers. That napkin smelled like burnt coffee and cheap perfume for so long that it became a kind of talisman. Proof that I wanted more badly enough to draw it in the margins of a dead-end job. From there, it was slow, relentless climbing. Free consultations. Underpriced projects for people who would tell their friends. Weekends spent hauling furniture instead of going out. My early portfolio was a patchwork of favors and tiny victories. By 23, I had my first real office, barely bigger than a walk-in closet but painted in colors I chose. By 26, I had a team, a wait list, and a reputation in the city. If Madison takes your project, she will not let it fail. Outside the office, the story was less flattering. In my family, effort and outcome were not the currency that mattered most. My mother adored telling her friends about my success, but inside our house, praise traveled along a different route. The loudest emergencies always won, and they were rarely mine. The clearest memory is not 10 different favors. It is one sharp scene I cannot scrub from my brain. I was 21, staring at that same napkin on the kitchen table, explaining how I had been offered a spot in a competitive design program abroad. The kind of program that opens doors in this industry. Tuition was covered. I just needed help with living costs for the first few months. On the counter beside me lay a stack of overdue bills with my sister's name on them. Credit cards, car payments, things she called temporary problems, and my mother called life happens. My mother picked up the napkin, smiled at the sketch, and set it gently back down. "You are strong, Maddie," she said. "You will figure something out. Your sister, she needs more help. She has more on her shoulders." Strength should have been a compliment. In our house, it felt like a curse. The stronger I was, the easier it became to decide I could live without what they would never dream of denying her. I stayed. I did not go abroad. I poured that disappointment into my work, into the company that would one day carry my name on the door. We never talked about that choice again, but every time my mother brushed off one of my milestones with, "You will be fine," and rushed to patch another hole in my sister's life, that napkin burned a little hotter in my memory. Years later, when the company finally took off, my mother began using a new phrase, family legacy. She said it at dinners, at holidays, in front of distant relatives who nodded approvingly. "We are building something that will stay in the family," she would say, as if we all agreed on what "we" meant. She saw the clients, the awards, the magazine spreads. She saw the bookings calendar that never seemed to have enough white space. What she did not see, or chose not to see, was the quiet arithmetic behind it all. Every project that landed because I stayed late, every relationship I built from scratch, every risk that succeeded because I backed it with my own reputation. People like to romanticize the idea of family business. It sounds warm, safe, wrapped in tradition. But if the definition of family shifts every time someone needs rescuing, what exactly are you building on? That question did not turn into words until the day my mother asked me to meet her at a restaurant and talk about the future of the business. At the time, I thought we were finally about to sit at the same table as equals. I walked in, wearing the blazer I had bought after signing my first seven-figure contract, the coffee-stained napkin tucked like a secret in my wallet. I had no idea that by the end of that meal the napkin would feel less like a symbol of my dream and more like evidence of a crime. The restaurant was one of those places with dim lighting and soft music, the kind of setting people choose for big news they want to dress in elegance. My mother picked it because you deserve somewhere nice, but it felt more like a stage than a celebration. She was already seated when I arrived, fingers wrapped around a mug of tea she had not touched. The steam had died. The tea had gone cold. That detail stuck with me later, a strange little mirror of everything else that was about to follow. "Look at you," she said as I sat down, eyes sweeping over my blazer, my laptop bag, the exhaustion I was trying to hide. "You have been working too hard." For a moment, I let myself believe we were on the same side. I started talking about the new hotel project, the potential for expansion, the way our inbox was overflowing. I laid out ideas for hiring, for refining our brand, for finally moving into a space that matched the scale of what we had become. She listened, nodding slowly, then placed her mug down with a soft clink that cut through my excitement. "I have been thinking about the future of the business," she said, echoing the words from her text. "About the family legacy." That phrase again. It floated between us like a rehearsed line. "I want it to be secure," she continued. "Stable, not so dependent on just one person." It took me a second to realize that one person was me. I talked about building systems, about training managers, about diversifying our client base. She shook her head gently, as if I had missed the point. "You are incredible at what you do," she said. "But you have always been the strong one. You do not need the same safety net as—" She hesitated, leaving the other name unspoken, but we both heard it. "There are people in this family who need security more." The air shifted. The room did not get colder, but it might as well have. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Thick paper. Formal tabs. I knew that look. It was the same kind of folder I saw in investor meetings and contract signings. "These are the documents," she said. "We have been working with the lawyers. It will all stay in the family. The brand, the clients, everything. We are just shifting who carries the responsibility." I opened the folder. My name was everywhere, printed, embedded, threaded through clauses I did not recognize. Near the back, I saw a term that made my stomach tighten. Restructuring of control. Underneath it, a simple translation. I was no longer the owner. I was being offered a role as consultant if I wanted it. This makes no sense, I said, though my voice came out calmer than I felt. I built this. I took the risks. I am the one signing contracts at 2 in the morning while everyone else is asleep. And that is exactly why you will be fine, she replied. You know how to build. You have that gift. Some people do not. They need something already standing to keep them afloat. On the table between us sat her untouched mug, the surface of the tea reflecting the overhead light like a tiny, trembling mirror. My mind flicked back to our kitchen years before. That coffee-stained napkin, the way my dreams had been deferred so another crisis could be handled first. Same script, different props. An ugly thought slipped in. In this family legacy, who was actually the heir and who had just been doing the construction work? As I flipped through the pages, another detail pricked my attention. A new line of credit, approved recently, using company assets as collateral. The justification was vague. Future expansion and operational flexibility. It was the kind of phrase you use when you hope no one will ask where the money actually went. Why was I not told about this? I asked, tapping the page. She waved it off. Technical stuff. The lawyers handled it. You do not need to stress over every little financial detail. This is about what is best for the family. Best for the family. The words tasted sour. If this was really about all of us, why did it feel like I was the only one being asked to disappear? I could feel a laugh rising in my throat, brittle and sharp. For a second, I almost let it out. Instead, I shut the folder gently. So, the plan, I said, is that I hand over the company I built, step aside, and trust that this legacy will take care of people who never once stayed up with me to keep it alive. And I am supposed to be grateful because I am strong enough to start from zero again. Her eyes filled with a wounded kind of surprise, as if my reaction were the real betrayal. This is not punishment, she insisted. It is balance. You have always wanted your own path, your own identity. This frees you to do that. We keep the business where it belongs. Everyone wins. Everyone, apparently, except the person who had dragged that business into existence in the first place. There, in that dim restaurant, with cooled tea between us and my name scattered through contracts like a watermark, the shape of the truth finally settled. When my mother said family legacy, she did not mean all of us. She meant the story she had been telling herself for years, the one where I was the dependable builder and someone else stood in the spotlight. I closed the folder and realized that this meeting was not a discussion. It was a presentation of a decision made without me. The only choice left was what kind of ending I would write for myself inside it. If the restaurant was the performance, the living room was the autopsy. A few days after that meeting, my mother insisted we talk it through as a family. The house looked the same as always. Framed photos on the walls, the old couch sinking in the middle, the faint smell of lemon cleaner clinging to everything. Familiar scenery, unfamiliar stakes. The contracts lay on the coffee table, the same folder from the restaurant now slightly worn at the edges. My mother hovered near it, straightening pages that did not need straightening. She kept repeating one line like a spell. We are just keeping it in the family. The more she said it, the colder the words felt. If family was truly the reason, why was I suddenly positioned as the outsider? How does a structure get to claim togetherness while pushing its main architect out the side door? I picked up the folder again, this time reading more slowly. Among the legal jargon, that same line of credit stared back at me. New money pulled into the company on the promise of future profits. A quiet hook sunk deep into the foundation I had laid. The more I looked at those dates, the clearer it became that this transition had been planned long before I was invited to the table. Why wasn't I told about this loan? I asked. My mother's jaw tightened. Because it is technical, and we did not want you to stress. You do not hide things from a business partner to spare their feelings. You hide them because you know they would say no. A slow anger began to build, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that stacks itself brick by brick. Every "you'll be fine," every "you're strong," every time my needs were postponed because someone else's crisis screamed louder, all layered into this moment where my entire company was being moved around like a piece on a board. She gestured toward the contracts. Sign, and this stays ours. Your work, your brand, everything you built remains in the family. That is what matters. The paradox was almost elegant. Family was both the justification for erasing me and the shield she held up when I flinched. If I resisted, I was attacking the very thing I had spent years telling myself I still half belonged to. I looked around the living room, at the photos of holidays where I had arrived late from job sites, covered in dust and apologies. In almost every frame, I was slightly off to the side, leaning in, half blurred. The center of the pictures was always the same: the louder stories, the messier crises, the people who needed more. A thought surfaced, quieter than the anger but heavier. If I signed, would I be participating in my own erasure? And if I refused, would I simply trade that erasure for a new identity? The ungrateful, selfish child who abandoned family over money? Some people think revenge starts with rage. For me, it started with a line I drew in my mind, thin and invisible, between what I owed them and what they had no right to keep demanding. My mother launched into another speech about sacrifice and unity, about how we must sometimes let go of what we love for the greater good. She spoke as if she, too, were losing something, as if the weight of all this was evenly distributed. But the numbers did not agree. The risk attached to that fresh line of credit did not agree. The way my name appeared on some documents as if it had always been meant to slide quietly into a guarantor role definitely did not agree. Revenge, I thought, might simply be the choice to stop participating in a story that consumes you without ever feeding you back. "Are you going to sign?" she asked, the softness in her tone starting to fray. I picked up the pen. The room felt too small, the air too thick, but my hand was steady. I signed the transfer that cut me off from the company I had built. I did not sign anything that placed me as a co-signer on the new debt. Those papers were not on the table. At least, not yet. As the ink dried, my mother let out a breath that sounded almost relieved. "You will see," she said. "This will be better for everyone." For everyone had always been a strangely selective category in this house. I walked out of that living room with my copy of the documents and a quiet promise folded under my ribs. I would not spend the rest of my life forgiving people who mistook my endurance for consent. If they ever tried to drag me back into the wreckage they were building without me, my answer would not be the one they were used to. At the time, I thought that promise was just a private oath. I did not know that within weeks, it would become the only barrier between me and a disaster carrying my name. The first time someone called my absence a power move, I was sitting across from Chad in a small cafe that smelled exactly like the furniture store where I had drawn my first designs. "Full circle," he joked. "Different table, same stubborn girl with too much ambition and not enough backup." "You walking away?" he said, stirring his drink. "Might be the loudest thing you have ever done." I snorted. It felt more like collapsing in private. He shook his head. "You are underestimating the silence. They have spent years assuming you will rush in whenever they shout. This time, you did not. That is not nothing." He was right, but I did not fully understand how right until we started rewinding how we had gotten there. Rewind a few weeks. The official announcement about the transition went out on the company website and social media. A polished photo of my mother and my sister in one of our showcase projects, all smiles and soft lighting. The caption called it an exciting new chapter in our family business. I was mentioned in a single line: "Madison Gray will be stepping back to pursue personal creative ventures." Stepping back. Like I had simply decided to take a long vacation. I tried to look away, to focus on my empty new studio instead. Bare walls, rented desks, a handful of sample boards leaning against the brick. But the internet does not care what you are trying to ignore. Clients started messaging. One long-term client texted, "Hey, are you still involved there? Something feels off." Another wrote, "We signed based on your name. Now no one answers emails. Are you okay?" Their words braided frustration and loyalty in a way that hurt and healed at the same time. My instinct was to rush in, fix things behind the scenes, preserve the brand I had built even if my name was no longer on the door. That instinct was exactly what had been exploited for years. So instead of crawling back, I answered honestly but carefully. I had left. I was starting over. I wished them the best, but if they wanted my work, it would have to be with my new studio, on my terms. Some drifted away. Some said they would think about it. Some came back within days, angry after missed deadlines and broken promises, suddenly more willing to follow the person who had built the results they loved rather than the label that now framed them. The more stories I heard, designs half finished, budgets blown, calls dodged, the clearer it became. My absence was not a small gap. It was a sinkhole. Then came the whispers about money. A supplier mentioned that invoices were going unpaid. A contractor complained that checks arrived late and light. No one had proof of anything illegal, but the pattern was familiar. Overpromising, overspending, assuming someone else would bail them out. It was in that growing storm that Chad dragged me out for coffee. He had known me since my first apartment makeover, when I was still charging barely more than cost and praying someone would like the result enough to tell their friends. He had seen the climb. He had seen the sacrifice. "I have been watching," he said, hands wrapped around his mug. "They are trading on your reputation while tearing it apart from the inside. How long are you going to let them use your shadow to cover their mess?" I stared at the table, at the thin ring his cup had left on the wood. What am I supposed to do? Run back and offer free consulting? No, he said sharply. You build something new, and you make it so good that anyone paying attention can see exactly where the real talent went. He leaned back, studying me. They wanted the shell of your company without the substance. Let them have it. You take the substance and start again. There it was, laid out more clearly than I had dared to think it. Absence turned into a weapon, not by attacking them directly, but by creating something they could not fake. "Feels petty," I muttered. "Feels accurate," he corrected. "Besides, is it punishment if all you are doing is showing the truth?" That question lodged somewhere deep. If success naturally exposed the people who had tried to steal its source, was that revenge, or just gravity finally doing its job? Within a week of that coffee, I signed the lease on the industrial loft that would become my new studio. High ceilings, exposed brick, terrible lighting at first. It did not look like much. It looked like freedom. I pinned the old coffee-stained napkin to the wall near my desk, right beside a blank sheet of paper. Old dream, new start. This time, there would be no shared last name on the deeds. Just mine. Starting over hurt in all the predictable ways. The money was tighter, the safety net thinner, the hours somehow even longer than before. But for the first time in years, every late night felt like a choice made for me, not for someone else's emergency. Madison Gray's studio, my name, on its own, no shared ownership, began as a whisper in a noisy market. I emailed a handful of clients I trusted, not with a sob story, but with an invitation. "I am taking on a limited number of projects," I wrote. "Smaller studio, more focused attention. If you want the kind of work we did before, without the chaos you have been dealing with lately, I would love to talk." Some said no, some did not answer. Enough said yes. We started with what we could handle: a downtown loft, a family home renovation, a boutique coffee shop that needed to feel like an escape. I documented everything, before and after reels, time lapses of paint rollers and lighting installations, short clips of clients crying happy tears when they saw their finished spaces. On social media, I never mentioned my old company by name. I did not have to. Comments filled the gap. So this is where the magic went. No wonder the other place feels different now. Explains why our last project crashed and burned. Meanwhile, people who had stayed behind at my old company began to trickle out. One former project manager asked to meet. She sat in my half-furnished office, twisting her hands. "They keep using your name in meetings," she said, "telling clients you are still in the background, blessing everything. But they are cutting corners, missing deadlines, and now there are rumors about money. It feels wrong. If they were willing to trade on my reputation like that in conversation, what were they doing on paper?" That answer arrived at an industry conference a few months later. I almost did not go. I felt like an imposter sitting on a panel labeled Women Redefining Design, but the invitation had come before the transition, and the organizers begged me not to cancel. So I put on the same suit I had worn to pitch my first big hotel project, a quiet reminder of everything I had already survived, and walked into a hotel ballroom filled with people who thought they knew my story. During a break, while juggling a plate of appetizers and small talk, a man in a conservative gray suit approached me. He introduced himself as a representative from an investment group that specialized in scaling creative businesses. "We met your mother a while back," he said. "We were told you were still very involved." The words landed like ice down my spine. He slid a slim folder across the high-top table. "I think you should see this." Inside were financial statements, contracts, and one document that made my skin crawl. A sizable line of credit, approved after my step back, listing my old company as borrower and, on the guarantor line, my name. My signature floated above the date, neat and confident. I knew instantly that it was not mine. It was close. The loops were similar. The slant was almost right. But there was a stiffness in the flourish, a practiced attempt instead of a muscle memory. Whoever had signed it knew my handwriting well enough to mimic it, just not well enough to inhabit it. My heart thudded in my ears, but my voice stayed even. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "From your mother," he said. "She spoke at length about keeping the business in the family, how you would always be there to guarantee its future. The numbers since then have been concerning. Missed payments, creative accounting. When we started digging, some of us wondered if you even knew this existed." The world narrowed down to the paper in my hand, that forged promise binding me to debts I had never agreed to. In that moment, any remaining illusion that this had been a misguided but loving transition died. This was not simply favoritism or bad judgment. This was fraud, wrapped in the language of family. "I had no knowledge of this loan," I said. "I did not sign this. I left before these papers were drawn up." He watched my face closely, then nodded like he had just confirmed a hypothesis. "We suspected as much," he replied. "There is going to be a meeting with the other investors and the board. We need clarity. We would like you there." As he spoke, a strange calm settled over me. For years, my strength had been used as a justification to assume I would absorb every blow quietly. Now that same strength was going to pull everything into the light. On the flight home from that conference, I stared out the window and thought about the equation that had been running in the background of my life. They used my name to build credibility, my work to attract clients, my resilience to excuse every unfair decision. If they were willing to forge my signature to secure more money, what else had they told themselves they were entitled to? If they had borrowed my identity to keep their house standing, was it really cruel to build my own house higher and let theirs collapse under the weight of its own lies? By the time my mother called begging me to save my sister, the damage was already done. What she did not know was that I had just walked out of a boardroom where every lie they had wrapped in family had been stripped to its bare, ugly numbers. The meeting took place in a glass-walled conference room 20 floors up. The city spread out beneath us like a reminder that reputations can look solid from far away, even while they crumble up close. Around the table sat investors, a few key clients, and two lawyers who radiated the kind of quiet that makes people confess. At the far end sat my mother and my sister, both looking smaller than I had ever seen them, dressed in outfits that tried too hard to say, "in control." The man from the conference opened the meeting. He projected copies of the forged loan documents on a screen, the black curve of my faked signature magnified for everyone to see. "We are here to resolve a discrepancy," he said. "These loans were acquired under the claim that Madison Gray remained an active guarantor of this company's obligations. She says she was not informed, did not consent, and did not sign." All eyes turned to me. I spoke once, clearly, calmly. I explained when I had left, what I had signed and what I had not. I described how I had discovered the forgery. I did not speculate about motives. I did not accuse anyone by name. I simply placed the facts on the table like evidence. When I finished, the room shifted its attention to my mother. At first, she did what she always did, reached for charm. She talked about miscommunication, about assuming Madison would always be part of us, about a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But charm does not balance books, and sentiment does not correct ledgers. The lawyers asked who had instructed the documents to be drawn up. They asked who had signed them. They asked where the money had gone. That last question was the one that gutted the room. A depressing amount of the loan was not in the business at all. It had been siphoned into things labeled as client relations and operational retreats that looked a lot like private school tuition, luxury vacations, and a new SUV. The rest had been thrown at sloppy expansions and overstaffing, decisions made with the confidence of people who believed that if things went wrong, someone stronger would step in and fix it. At one point, my sister tried to speak. "We thought Madison would not mind," she said. "She always said we were in this together." That was the closest anyone came to admitting what they had done. They had taken my past willingness to sacrifice and turned it into a blank check. The investors did not take it well. By the end of the meeting, their decision was clear. Funding was being pulled. Options were being explored to recover what could be recovered. Legal consequences were no longer a distant threat. They were a pending reality. I left that room with two things: freedom from a debt that had almost been hung around my neck, and a front-row view of the collapse that was now unstoppable. I had not pushed the building over. I had simply stepped away from the wall they had leaned too hard against. Which brings us back to the phone call. It came 2 days later, just after I finished a walkthrough on a new project. I was back in my own studio, surrounded by sample boards and the hum of a team that trusted me because I had never used their names on anything they did not consent to. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. When I answered, her voice was shredded. "They are shutting us down," she sobbed. "The bank, the investors, everyone. Your sister is falling apart. She is having panic attacks. She barely sleeps. She keeps saying it is all over. We could lose the house. Please, you have to help. If you come back, if you take over, if you talk to them, maybe they will give us another chance." In the background, I could hear someone crying harder, the choked, desperate sound of a person who has just realized the cliff they thought was a step. There was a time when that sound would have yanked me out of my own life without hesitation, when I would have driven over with a laptop and a plan, ready to carry everyone on my back again. But I had just watched a room full of people read through proofs of how my name had been used without my permission. I had just heard my sister say, with her own mouth, that she had assumed I would not mind. My mother's plea twisted the story the way she always had. We were not talking about fraud and stolen identity anymore. We were talking about family, about your sister, about the kids, about every emotional lever that had ever been pulled to turn my strength into a resource they were entitled to. For a moment, guilt and fury fought for space in my chest. Then something quieter prevailed. Clarity. You told them I was behind the loans, I said. You used my name to get money I never agreed to. And now you want me to step in and make it all go away. She sniffed, defensive even through tears. We thought you would understand. We did it for the family, for stability. You are successful now, you can handle this. She cannot. There it was, the old script in its rawest form. Your strength is our safety net. Mom, I said, you once decided that what I built belonged to someone else because you thought she needed it more. You called it fairness. You called it love. Then you used my name to keep that decision afloat. You did not ask. You assumed. And now that it is sinking, you are asking me to drown with you so you do not have to face the bottom alone. Silence stretched down the line. In it, I could hear every moment I had let myself be cast as the reliable one, the fixer, the one who would always come home when summoned. You would really let your own sister lose everything? She whispered. In another version of this story, that question would be the breaking point. I would rush in. I would negotiate with banks, take on debt, hire lawyers, fold my sister into my studio, tell myself that martyrdom was the same as loyalty. In this version, the one I am finally writing for myself, that question exposed a different truth. Every time I saved them from the consequences of their choices, I taught them they never had to change. I am not making her lose anything, I said. She did that when she took what was mine and spent money that was not hers, assuming my name would absorb the hit. You helped. I am just choosing not to be the shield this time. She began to cry again, softer now, like she finally understood that her usual tools were not working. So you will not help, she said. I will not take on her debt, I replied. I will not sign anything. I will not bring her into my company. I will text you the number of a lawyer who can help you negotiate, and a therapist who can help her survive this without destroying herself. Those are the only lifelines I am offering. You have become cruel, she whispered. Maybe that is what it looked like from where she stood. The source of every last-minute rescue suddenly stepping back, arms crossed. From where I stood, in a studio I had rebuilt from nothing twice now, it felt less like cruelty and more like finally returning the weight of their choices to the people who had made them. After I hung up, I stood for a long time in front of the wall where I had pinned that old coffee-stained napkin years ago. Next to it was a new sketch, a much larger space we were about to renovate, a project that would push my studio into a new league. The napkin no longer felt like evidence of a stolen dream. It felt like the first page of a story that had taken a long, brutal detour through betrayal and back again to something I should have claimed sooner. My own worth, independent of who needed me more. People like neat morals, so here is the closest thing I have to one. My mother once justified giving away my company with one sentence that turned me into background support for someone else's life. That sentence opened a door that led straight into financial lies, legal collapse, and a phone call she never imagined I would answer with anything but rescue. In the end, I did not scream. I did not sue them into oblivion. I did not burn their house down. I did something far worse in their eyes. I let them live in the truth they had built, and I walked forward into a life where being strong no longer meant being available to be used. If it were you, standing between the family that always assumed you would save them and the future you had finally carved out for yourself, would you have chosen rescue or release?